Welcome to the Aesthetic Doctor Podcast. We don't shy away and keep secrets here. We empower you with education, telling you the truth about all things aesthetic medicine while encouraging you to be the best version of yourself. It's time to look great and feel good doing it. This is your host, mom, speaker, and board-certified physician, Dr. Judith Borger.
Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 47 of the Aesthetic Doctor Podcast. Today, I have all the way from the other side of the world, from Australia to be specific, the amazing RN Michelle Gordon. She and I are talking about burnout, especially burnout in healthcare providers, which is super prevalent and worldwide. And really, she'll be sharing her personal journey as well as the tools that she has used to overcome her personal burnout and that she now uses to coach over 200 nurses in her coaching program to help decrease and prevent burnout. Michelle Gordon is also known as the Healthy, Happy Nurse. She's an expert on both burnout and coaching. So please help me welcome Michelle Gordon. All righty, you guys, like I said in the introduction, I have Michelle Gordon with me, and she is here all the way from Australia. And thank you for getting up before 5 a.m. for me and my listeners. So first of all, thank you for that. I hope you're well caffeinated or working on it at least.
I am. Thanks for having me, Judith. I've got my coffee right next to me.
And, you are also a nurse, an emergency nurse. And obviously my background is in emergency medicine. And I think, talking about burnout, I love that you hear from the other side of the world, from a completely different healthcare system, yet suffering from burnout. And in the US right now, emergency medicine is really the area of medicine that statistically has the highest percentage of burnout. So I just would love to hear sort of your thoughts about all the ways that, nurses, doctors, techs, assistants, everybody in medicine really, and I don't mean everybody, but so many people in medicine suffer from huge burnout, and what you think is contributing to that.
Yeah, such a big conversation that we can have today. And burnout is essentially a chronic form of misalignment. So misalignment in where the activities that we're dedicating our time to no longer align with our values and our life priorities. And what I'm finding and what I've seen in all my years since my burnout journey, and when I hit absolute rock bottom, that was 2018. And obviously we've had the pandemic since then, and so many other things. And we've, pretty much now somewhat gone back to normal, I guess, especially here in Australia, is just the pace in which, I guess, emergency medicine is. Definitely it's a different paced world or an environment. And it's, I guess, the front line of healthcare. So that also did see it took the brunt of the pandemic as well. And I remember when the pandemic hit, especially in Australia, we were all sort of standing there, particularly in our emergency department. I had back then I was working in a regional emergency department in central Queensland. So we weren't in a city or a built-up area in Australia. We were very regional, very remote, but serviced a big population in Australia. And we're all sort of standing around thinking, what is coming? What is happening here? And so the uncertainty and the fear can also fuel burnout, right? So there's a combination of so many things. And what I've also found is our internal, I guess, programs and patterns that we as individuals run in terms of people pleasing, perfectionism, and high achievers are also more susceptible to burnout too.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes those patterns have made us really successful throughout things that are like society conditioned, right? Like you got all the A's in school, and then you got into medical school or nursing school or whatever, and then you strive to the best, and then you took on a leadership role and all of this stuff, right? But I think the first thing that I really just wanted to make a comment on, and which is why I love having you, is really the idea that this is such a global phenomenon. And that, I sort of, in the tragedy of the degree of burnout, I love the idea that, again, as people across the world and as healthcare providers across the world, we share more similarities than differences, even if we work in different countries and in different systems. We're still human, and we face a lot of the same stressors being in these high stakes situation, probably having all these metrics to adhere to, increasing burden of like administration and paperwork. And in the US, we're really facing problems with understaffing and difficulty recruiting people. And and just the fact that, again, as an earth and a world of people, this isn't a US problem or an Australia problem. It's really like a human condition problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And I've spoken with so many nurses myself in my journey across, Australia, the States. I've worked with a lot of nurses to help them sort of through their journey through burnout and overcome that. And it's the same, almost the same set of experiences, just different location. Just a different location, and the same drivers of burnout too. And when the world stopped during the pandemic, which is what I'm seeing now, although my journey through burnout was pre-pandemic, the nurses that I've, working with post the pandemic, is the world stopped for so many people and slowed down. And yet the pace in which we had to then function in the medical system was very different, and it almost complicated, like you said, the metrics and administration and so many different complications. It sort of took our workload to another level, right? Which added to, I guess, the misalignment.
Yes. And I think, and again, I don't want to say that we in emergency medicine have it worse than any other nursing or healthcare profession. It just happens to be that we're both emergency medicine. So we can obviously talk about this as an example. And I think the other thing is too, that as the pandemic happened and life inside of the hospital was so different from life outside of the hospital, I think a lot of us in healthcare also felt like nobody else really understood what we were going through. Do you feel like your clients felt that way?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And as the rest of the world was sort of locked up, and restricted, I was almost like going to work thinking, my life hasn't changed. Like my life hasn't changed. I still get up, I still go to work. In the region where I live, they had supermarket open for healthcare workers at a certain time to do their groceries, and it was just, my life almost didn't change over that time, and we were still going about our normal, I guess, daily, get up, go to work, when the rest of the world had to stay home and had to change and had to do their work from home and all of those different things. So in that way, it was really conflicting, because, and then the people that we were servicing, so the people coming into the hospital, were also having a different experience, and their experience was very fearful. They were afraid. So that was a big impact too on the people who we were seeing, and the way they were feeling about coming into getting medical help. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a scary time, especially the beginning of the pandemic, when I think also, pre-vaccine and all that, nobody really knew how much risk we were putting ourselves on, how much risk the patients were at. But, going back to the original thing that we talked about, you have a couple times mentioned your journey to burnout, and from listening to your podcast and reading about your story, I've had the privilege to hear some of it, but I think it would just be really impactful, powerful story for you to share with our audience exactly what are all the symptoms that you experienced, what was your life like when you were really truly at rock bottom, and what caused it.
Yeah. So my journey, as I said, was in 2018 to 2016 to 18. And that in 2018, I really realized I hit my rock bottom, and I'd been functioning as an emergency nurse full time. had three small children at the time. My children have grown up, and at the time they were really little and really dependent, and my husband was working full-time in his business. And I, as the high achiever, over-functioning personality and people pleaser, was finding it really difficult to say no to extra shifts, to overtime. And I was now that I look back, I was in that chronic misalignment. So I was working a lot where my values really were my family and my small children. So I couldn't see that though at the time. And I kept pushing myself to do better, to do more, to show up, to really climb the ranks through emergency as an emergency nurse. And I started to just feel really numb. I thought, oh, I'll just keep pushing through. And that's the first stage. I'll just keep going. I'll just keep pushing through. And then I started to notice my health deteriorated. I started gaining weight. I wasn't sleeping very well. I wasn't looking after my nutrition or nourishing my body. And then the stress as well of trying to manage all of those different areas in my life, or not at all, and the way it was impacting me, I just put my head down and just kept working. And to cope with the heavy feelings of stress and overwhelm that I was feeling, I started to drink alcohol to numb out, and that was my escape. So I would come home from work. I'd had a really hectic shift in the emergency department. I was working in the resus room at the time, so that was mainly where I was doing my shifts, and it was crazy. That was my 5-6 shifts a week, sometimes 7 shifts a week. I was in that environment and coming home, and just to escape, and so I didn't have to feel any of the feelings, I would drink at least a bottle of wine, if not 2. And that became a really chronic habit. And eventually I just tipped right over into that rock bottom, where one of those moments for me was waking up on the floor after passing out, and I thought, what am I doing? I'm going to kill myself if I keep going through this and not look after myself. And it was one of those big wake up moments for me that I went, wow, this has got to stop. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. And what happened next?
So I woke up in that moment and sort of had a good hard look at myself and thought, I can't keep going. My other moment was when my little daughter, who was 18 months at the time, she was 2.5. So she was toddling around, just talking, and she was exploring the world. And she saw me sit down on the couch one afternoon after a shift. I walked in the door and poured my wine, and I sat down, and I'd had a couple of glasses of wine, and again had resumed my position of I'm escaping, I'm just numbing out now. And she came up to me and had been trying to get my attention, and ended up walking straight up to me in where I was sitting on the lounge, and reached out and grabbed my face with her little hands. And she said, looked at me in the eye and said, Mummy, where are you? And she was just staring at me as if, where, you're not here. You're here, but you're not here. And that was the second moment where I went, right, enough is enough. And I reached out to a personal trainer who I just thought, I'll get my health and fitness back on track. That will help. And it ended up being a journey where I stopped the alcohol and I started going to the gym to really break that habit of coming home, pouring the wine. And that was my first step. And I started to feel really crystal clear, and I started to release that brain fog, and I started to feel again, and I wasn't numbing myself. And then my next journey was really working on, well, what were the drivers of my burnout here? Why was I choosing to work really hard above my and over my values? Where was the misalignment? And I started to really look at, well, I was a perfectionist and I didn't realize that before. And then I realized, well, I'm a people pleaser and I can't say no. And I need to start saying no and really have some boundaries around my time and energy and my life priorities. And when I felt inadequate, I realized that I would overfunction and go above and beyond in terms of my capacity. And I started to look at, wow, well, that's really interesting that I do that. And I had to sort of own those areas of myself and really look at that and really start to, for the first time, see that I was an amazing emergency nurse. I'm an amazing nurse, right? Why everyone else knew that, but I didn't. So when I got clear on all of those things, really developed those boundaries, started to, I guess, love myself from the inside outwards, things started to change. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That is, I mean, such a heartbreaking and powerful journey all at once. So thank you for your vulnerability, first of all. You kind of sort of glossed over the like, oh, I just stopped drinking and I went and sought out a personal trainer, but I assume that was really, really hard, right? After like having this pattern for such a long time. I mean, it wasn't just I did it, I waved a magic wand. I mean, I that must have been just such a long and hard journey, especially, without truly professional help to dig yourself out of it.
Absolutely. It was. So it was not the most, I think the first 6 months were really, really hard in terms of the mental battle that I was having and the habits that I had created that weren't serving me. And I had to undo all of those habits. And I remember coming home from work after yet another crazy shift in the emergency department. And my go-to was pour the wine and escape and just numb myself. And I had to not do that anymore. And that had to be a choice. So that mental battle for me to be able to just sit in it, in the feelings that I was feeling, rather than numb and escape, it was horrible. It was something that I had switched off. And this is the thing about burnout. And, throughout the journey through burnout, there's a period where you switch off your emotions because it's easier to not deal with them and to not feel them. And that's what I had done. So feeling those emotions was really painful. And that was perhaps, it felt really scary, and that was perhaps the hardest thing that I had to learn to do. And I remember so many times where I just cried and cried and cried and felt the pain of the overwhelm and the stress of the day that I'd had, and the little baby that we had to try and resus that we couldn't resus, that we couldn't bring back. And those things, I had to just sit in it and just be somewhat come to terms with them. So yeah, it wasn't an easy journey, and it did take quite a few months for me to go through that. And yeah, that in itself was a big journey.
You're obviously an amazing, resilient person to have had that. And at this point in the podcast, though, I do want to, make sure that all of our listeners know that even though, Michelle didn't have access, I think that's one of the things we had discussed too, of a lot of resources, which is why she's a resource now. If you're feeling in rock bottom as listeners, please reach out. If you need any recovery programs, if you need any coaching, I, at the time, worked with a psychiatrist when I was at the lowest of my burnout, because my catching point was that I felt myself having a thought that maybe the world and my children would be better off without me, so I just want to make sure that at this point to really throw that out there to everybody, that you are not alone, no matter how alone you feel. Even if you just know Michelle and I, reach out to us, because you're not alone. This is, other people are suffering, and this is the problem, right? We're all suffering in silence. And especially, like you mentioned, I do pediatric emergency medicine, and it is there's so much trauma in healthcare, right? Where we just layer trauma upon trauma, and so many times we internalize it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, in the midst of burnout, it does feel really lonely. And it's another thing that we as healthcare workers need to I guess this is why I do what I do now in supporting people through burnout, is talk about it and not hide it, the fact. And I think we are so good as healthcare workers to put on the front that we're okay. We look after people. That's our job. When deep down inside, often so many are struggling, and that's where talking about it here on your podcast, and being that support and being that resource, having someone where you can reach out to. And from what I'm in my journey and what I've experienced since, is that so many people, so many healthcare workers are not feeling as though they can reach out.
Yes.
And just enduring that loneliness and that struggle on their own. And we don't have to do that.
Absolutely. And so, as sort of the complete hero saga, because I think you've really completed the hero saga, you obviously are on the other side of burnout, even though, we have already mentioned that it is a chronic thing, right? And some of your patterns are chronic, and most of us kind of float a little on an ocean. And your podcast is aptly named Feeling Bliss After Burnout, which I assume is sort of what you're working on right now. And, I love that when you talk about your coaching, you talk about, breaking through beliefs, helping people into alignment, and helping people into manifestation. Tell me about the manifestation piece, or the alignment piece, or all of them.
Yeah. Oh, look, it's exciting. What I realized is, after burnout, and the process that I went through, was I came back into alignment with myself. For the first time in years, I felt like myself. I felt I could feel my feelings. I felt confident. I felt clear, crystal clear in my mind. I wasn't spending my time in my head overthinking. I had energy again, where I hadn't had energy for so many years. I was waking up exhausted. And all of that, I guess, all of that just stopped. And I really found that I was in alignment with who I was, with my values, with my energy, with what I wanted and how I wanted to live my life. And that alignment part was when I started to be able to look forward in my future, both in my professional and personal life, and and do the things that I wanted to do. And that's where the manifestation came in, because I really got clear on how did I want to live my life? How did I want to look and feel in my body? I lost 12 kilos, 12 kilos. That's you talk
25
pounds.
pounds.
Yeah, I lost a lot of weight and I got really fit and strong. I've maintained that now for 5 years. I wanted to work part-time. I didn't want to work full-time anymore. I wanted to own a beautiful home by the beach where I live in Australia. And I started to be able to forecast all of these goals in my life and my family's life. And all of these things started to come into our lives. And it was that alignment, because I had cleaned up all of those other parts of myself, such as the people pleasing, such as the perfectionism and the over-functioning. And I started to feel my feelings for the first time. That alignment then helps me start to create a really clear future in what I wanted. And that's where the exciting part is when you get through burnout, when you come back into alignment, everything starts to drop in terms of what you actually want from life when you start asking for it, and when you get really clear about what that is, and when you've cleaned up the limiting beliefs and the old programs and patterns. And so many, I've worked with over 200 nurses since 2020, and all who have experienced a burnout in various stages. And this is the journey that they're on now too, is that alignment. When they drop back into alignment, is they then can sort of really forecast and start to manifest the future that they want. And it's so exciting.
I love that, because I feel a lot the same way in terms of just being aligned with yourself and your values and your goals and your priority. And then, I call it very much like being intentional, being intentional with how you spend your time, what you put your energy in, how you plan for the future. And you're absolutely right. That's like when suddenly the abundance of the universe sort of descends on you. And a lot of it is like also that you do have, like you said, aligned and focused actions that make it happen, right? Like when I think of manifestation, even though there's definitely this energetic component to it, we're all making it happen, right? You're not just sitting on your couch wishing for things. Like you're doing the steps and you're being intentional and you're acting a certain way. So I just love where you've come, and I love the message you have for kind of nurses everywhere. So taking it a step further, do you have any practical advice for anybody who might be listening, maybe even going to or from their shift saying, wow, I think that's me?
Yeah. The first thing is to acknowledge and accept where you're at. So that's the first thing. And so many people in burnout are going through the motions. So they're just living on that hamster wheel and feeling the frustration. But like I said, putting their head down and continuing to plow through and push through. That's the first thing that has to stop, is actually stop and have a look at, wow, this is where I'm at and it's not great and I don't feel great about it. So when you can stop and acknowledge and accept, then you can decide to choose. It's making that decision that I'm not going to live like this anymore. And what do I want to see happen in my life from now? And I think that's the second step, is where to from here? What does that look like for me? And getting help, like reaching out to someone for help is really important. And for me, when I went through this, I had tried several, traditional methods that were offered here in Australia for help in burnout, and it just didn't work for me. So counselling, and I talked about the past, and I talked about past experiences that I was feeling in the emergency department as a nurse. And I was finding that I was sort of going around and round in circles. What's changed the game for me was coaching. And, there's no right or wrong here. Counseling is amazing. It just didn't work for me. So what I found was coaching was really cleaning up the unconscious mind and the patterns and the programs that I was running in the unconscious mind, and really moving towards the future rather than reflecting on the past. And that was another really big step that started to change the way I was showing up. So I think those first few things is own and accept where you are. Look at where you want to go and what you want your life to be like beyond burnout, and then reaching out to someone for help. Yeah.
And I mean, you said it perfectly, because that has been my journey as well. It was coaching that really changed my life. And, the other thing that I want to just add to what you said, if somebody is listening and they're really deep in burnout, it's also okay if right now you can't imagine the future yet, because sometimes things are so dark that maybe even just noticing is all you can do today, or maybe just saying, I'm not okay. And that's all you have to say, because there is different squares that you move through in an evolution of healing. So, Michelle has obviously taken the first two steps together, as we first kind of acknowledge and notice, and then we start planning for the future and set a vision. But it's totally okay if you're so squarely in square one that you're just like, this is awful. I feel terrible. I'm drinking, or I'm having suicidal thoughts, or I wish my power would go out, that I would never have to go to work again. Or I've even had people tell me I was wishing that I could be sick, so I would never have to go to work again. So if you're that deep in it, it's also okay for step one to just say, I'm not okay.
Absolutely. And you're so right, Judith. There's times where the fog and the haze and the darkness is so overwhelming that you can't see the future. And that's okay. It's like I'm here, and I don't need to be in this place or where I'm at right now in my life. And if that's where you are, that's okay. There's a way to sort of move beyond that. And I guess it's really deciding, okay, I am going to shift this and I'm going to work through this. And that was one of the real powerful moments for me, when I talked about when my daughter, and then she came to me and, looked me in the eye. And then that moment that I woke up on the floor, it was that decision. Whoa, I need to stop this behavior, and I'm going to work this out.
Yeah. And I had that aha moment too, where I was like, whoa, this is has gone way too deep. Got to do something. And you're absolutely right. That point is at some point, and sometimes it can be a big thing or a small thing. So I'm just saying, if somebody's listening to this and tends to on the way back from their shift being like, whoa, this is what it's called. Okay. Reach out. And I love that you're helping other nurses. Are you still working clinically as a nurse, or not at all?
Yeah, so I took 12 months ago, I left the emergency department. So I had been there for 9 years, and I'd been working as a crit care nurse for probably around 15 years. And I took 12 months off to really hone in on my coaching business and work with clients and build that. And just recently, I've gone back to casual work as an occ health and safety nurse. So I'm just doing a little bit of nursing to keep my registration current. And my main focus is my business. Yeah.
All right. Well, this is a perfect segue. So I love, though, that you've dedicated your life now to helping not only your patients, but fellow nurses, because, like we said before the cameras were rolling, the recording was on, we really both strongly believe that, healthcare workers need to be taken care of. And you and I are both people that work with healthcare workers to kind of decrease their burnout and, help their work-life integration. So I assume you do most of this virtually so people can contact you from all over the world?
Yeah. Yep. Most of my coaching is virtual, which is so great. So I can connect with anyone across the world and different time zones. And I've worked with nurses in the States, lots of nurses obviously here in Australia. And I've got different programs and courses depending on where each person is at. Generally, the process that I take people through burnout who are, in the depths of burnout is a 12-week experience. And most of my clients really start to feel a shift and change within 4 weeks. So, yeah.
So where can people find you? Please tell us. And of course, as always, we will link all of your links in the show notes. But, if somebody's listening and they're walking, please don't pull over and look up her website while you're driving. But, I think it helps to hear it as well as see it. So if you would just share some of the ways that people can find you, that'd be great.
So the 2 ways where you can find me is Instagram, which is at @MichelleGordon_coach. And I'm also on Facebook as the Healthy Happy Nurse. And there is the third way is my podcast, which is Finding Bliss After Burnout. So, the two main ways on social media, Facebook and Instagram. So.
And I love that you call your company the Healthy Happy Nurse, because I feel like that's obviously the total goal. And how magnificent would that be if every healthcare worker out there was a healthy and happy one? And I kind of have always said that like every physician deserves a coach. And I feel like the same about nurses. I feel like every nurse deserves a coach. So thank you so much for being that person and really shining such light and hope into the world of healthcare workers, and also being so vulnerable and honest with your own story and path, and for getting up like super early in the morning for me.
That's okay. It's been so great to speak with you and have this conversation. And you're doing amazing things. And it's so great to connect. So thank you for having me.
Well, thanks, guys. And we will see you during our next episode. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Aesthetic Doctor Podcast with Dr. Judith Borger. We'd love to connect with you outside of the show. Follow Dr. Borger on Instagram at Dr. Borger, and find more online and ways to work with Dr. Borger at www.theaestheticdoctor.com. Until next time, be well.